Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the seminar series organized by the Ateneo de Manila University, Department of Economics, and the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development. So to begin our seminar, we have some house rules. We will let the speaker finish his presentation first before we entertain questions. To our Zoom participants, kindly stay on mute and stop sharing your video during the duration of the presentation. During the Q&A, please virtually raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged. You may unmute and show yourself when asking your question. To our participants joining us through Facebook, please post your question in the comment section. Slides, videos, and other materials from the seminar are posted on our website only when the speaker will give his consent for sharing them. So our speaker for this afternoon is Associate Professor of Economics at the Ateneo de Manila University. He is the former Dean of the John Gokongwei School of Management and the former Chair of the Department of Economics. His research interests include macroeconomics, financial economics, and international finance. He obtained his doctorate in economics from Fordham University, the Jesuit University of New York City. So to talk about mandatory credit allocation and government guarantee, let us all welcome our speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Luis F. Dumlao. I now give the virtual floor to Dean Louis.
So good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my presentation first. Jemmy, is the presentation shown on the, let me just get your confirmation. Is it shown on the screen already?
Yes, sir. Confirming that we can see your first slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So just first, an introduction. Mandatory credit allocation is a policy intervention to pressure banks to lend to certain sectors otherwise unfettered finance would not give access to. While some argue that mandatory credit allocation results in suboptimal allocation of resources, because after all, in this sense, government is intervening with the free market, it has also been shown that such intervention results in socially desirable outcome. However, mandatory credit allocation should not be the responsibility of banks only. It must be supported with government guarantees. And so mandatory credit allocation is basically used in this country in the agricultural sector, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, or the MSMEs, and then also enterprises involved in innovation. The outline of my presentation is just to brief everyone how mandatory credit allocation is in practice, is used in practice. And then I will argue and show that, well, actually it's already given that mandatory credit allocation can be socially desirable. However, mandatory credit allocations work better and more fairly with government guarantee. And then thereafter, I will discuss the state of credit allocation in the agriculture sector, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, and the innovation. I end my presentation with some takeaways. So mandatory credit allocation in practice. The first time it was used in this country, as far as the record, my record shows, is through the Presidential Decree number 717 in 1975, where it ordered banks that at least 25% of all their loanable funds should be allocated to agriculture and the beneficiaries of the agrarian reform. the Republic Act 10000 or the Agri-Agra Reform Credit Act of 2009 replaced the Presidential Decree 717. And it says here that at least 25% of all loanable funds must be allocated to agriculture and fisheries, of which 10% must be allocated to agrarian reform beneficiaries. RA Republic Act 9501, or the Magna Carta of Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises, or MSMEs of 2008, is a law mandating banks to allocate all their loanable 8% of their loanable funds for micro and small enterprises and at least 2% for medium enterprises. Then the RA 11293, or the Filipino Innovation Act of 2019, mandates banks to allocate 4% of all their loanable funds to innovation. In all existing laws, the penalty is 0.5% of non-compliance. So just for example, a bank has a loanable fund of 100 billion, and in the Agri-Agra requirement, it says that 25 billion therefore should be allocated to that sector. If hypothetically the bank is only able to lend 15 billion pesos to the Agri-Agra, then the non-compliance is 10 billion pesos. And therefore, the penalty is 0.5% of 10 billion, which is the banks will be required to pay 50 million pesos. So basically, the mission of this is, putting money on the agricultural sector. There's nation building into it, if you can call it that. However, the mission of nation building is left out for the banks to accomplish. And unfortunately, the government has no skin on the game. So there's no resources from government that comes. It's left out for the banks to have their resources put into the agri sector. So the banks has a choice. One choice is to accomplish the mission, but risk depositors' money. Keep in mind, the loanable funds are not the bank's money. The loanable funds are depositors' money. Everyone here who has savings account has a skin on that, basically. And the bank's choice number 2 is protect the depositors' money through non-compliance, but pay the penalty as a cost of doing business. Apparently, not all our audience here are economists, but let me just be as simple as possible to show that mandatory credit allocation can be socially desirable. So I'll try to be very layman. For those who want the technical details, you can get in touch with me later on and have academic conversations. This is taken from ManQ, and the model is as old as going through 1986. So A and B, basically, these are the applicants. This one will apply. C and D, the farmer, for example, will not apply. Anything on the left of row, which is D and D, basically are socially desirable investments, and A and C are not worthy investments because they have very low rates of return. So basically here in A, for A, this is a farmer that applies to borrow, although it is not socially desirable to lend them. But unfortunately, the banks do not know that because of the information, asymmetric information. Anywhere on B, this part here, the farmer applies to borrow and it is socially desirable to lend. So that's good. We want to do this investment, and at the same time, the farmer applies. C, the farmer does not apply to borrow and it is not socially desirable to lend. So this is good also. C is good because we don't want to make this investment, and at the same time, the farmer is not applying to borrow. And then D, the farmer does not apply to borrow and it is socially desirable to lend. This is not good. We want to make this investment. However, the farmer is not applying. So therefore, basically, there is efficient allocation in B and C. We want to make this investment and the farmer borrows. C, we don't want to make this investment and the farmer does not borrow. And therefore, there is inefficient allocation in A and D. We don't want to make this investment and yet the farmer is applying. D, we want to make this investment and yet the farmer is not applying. So therefore, if the market is left on its own, the entire loanable portfolio is allocated suboptimally. It is not what is best for the economy, basically. So what's mandatory credit allocation with government guarantee? With mandatory credit allocation, MCA, and asymmetric information, because banks do not know the difference between good ones and bad ones, banks raise interest, which drives safe but low return agricultural businesses out of the market. So, what are the what's on the policy menu? Policy number 1 is to raise the collateral, but the nature of the sectors that need support have small, if any, collateral. For example, we need to support the agricultural sector. We need to support the micro and small enterprises, but their nature is they have no collateral. So this one is not basically an option. Policy number 2, Stiglitz and Weiss once proposed having an interest ceiling, so lowering down the interest. The problem with that is it increases the application of good and bad lenders alike, and because of asymmetric information, we don't know which ones are good and bad. And policy number 3 is government subsidy, which reduces interest. But just like anything that reduces interest, it increases the application of good and bad lenders alike. And of course, the policy number 4 is government guarantee with risk-free interest. So for me, just a side comment is I have this paper and I doubt that it would be able to be published in an international journal, precisely because it is not new. What is a puzzle is how come we are not using it? Because there are more than 2,000 government guarantees of these types in 100 countries in 2003. And I suspect it would be even more than that now in 2022. And there are studies of the benefits. There are separate, there's one in Canada, in UK, in Italy, Japan, China, South Korea, and so on and so forth. That there are socially beneficial results to having mandatory credit allocation, but having government guarantee. Okay, so again, just emphasize, mandatory credit allocation increases the interest, which kicks out good and bad applicants alike. However, artificially decreasing interest rates invites good and bad applicants alike. However, mandatory credit allocation with government guarantees is the only one that invites good lenders and kicks out bad applicants alike. So some considerations. The truth is government guarantee do cost taxpayers money. Because after all, where would the money guarantee come from? It comes from the cover of government. But government guarantee also measures the social value of the MCA. The point is this, if government is to guarantee these loans, it either has to raise taxes or it has to take the money somewhere else, for example, from the Department of Education or the Department of Health. So therefore, if the government is willing to put in 50 billion pesos of guarantee, then in a sense, it is investing on political capital, or it's taking on somewhere else, and therefore the government has a skin on the game. And it can, in some way, more fairly impose a mandatory credit allocation. If the government is not willing to guarantee anything, if it is not willing to raise taxes, or it is not willing to take money from the, for example, Department of Education, then it only signals that this mandatory credit allocation has no social value for government, and therefore it is unfair for government to impose that responsibility to banks. Another question is, why can't government lend itself or be the lender of last resort? If the government is not guaranteeing it, why not just, instead of guaranteeing it, why not be the lender itself? And this is not new also, because government acting as bank invites crony capitalism. But by the way, this is not unique to the Philippines. It's everywhere around the world. There are numerous studies on that. What could be the cost to taxpayers? The latest data, I think this is June of 2022. The total loanable fund in this country is 8.223 trillion pesos. And if we impose the 15% on agriculture, so that would be 1.234 trillion of mandatory credit allocation. If the risk-free interest rate is 2%, so that's the BSP rate. And if we are to assume the 5% default rate, then basically the actuarial taxpayers cost is 63 billion, which is something to be considered. It's not, well, considering more than 2 trillion pesos of government budget, this is not very surmountable. With GG, will banks commit adverse selection? So the question is, the fact that the government guarantees the loans, will banks lend without care that what they are lending might not be paid out? And the answer to that is no. The reason is that the market interest is still greater than the risk-free interest. So the incentive is for the bank to pay due diligence, because if they pay due diligence, they will get the market interest, which is bigger than if the borrower defaults and the payment for that is the very small risk-free interest. I'll now go to the mandatory credit allocation in different sectors. And what I have here, the blue here, is the actual credit allocation of the banking industry. And what I have, the orange here, is the credit allocation to the agricultural sector, mandatory credit allocation to the agricultural sector. And what you see here is approximately roundabout before, since 2015, the banking industry has not fully complied. And what the message is saying is that the industry has effectively opted to protect depositors' money and pay the non-compliance fee as a cost of doing business. Again, let us keep in mind that the loanable fund are not the bank's money, they are the depositors' money. And I suspect most of us have a savings account in this room. The mandatory credit allocation to the agrarian reform beneficiaries, and what we see here is the banking industry has never fully complied anytime since the start of this. And the industry has effectively protected depositors' money and paid the non-compliance fee as a cost of doing business. What I have here is the percentage share of major industries. This 60% here, the latest, is the service sector. The red is the industry, and the green is the agriculture, fishery, and forestry. And what we see here is the policy. The policy is to forces banks basically to lend 25% of its loanable funds, even if the agricultural sector represents at most 10% of its client or the market. And actual data does indicate that banks allocate approximately 10% to its loanable funds to the agriculture sector. So as the industry, the banking industry, is loaning proportionate amount to the agricultural sector. But the question of course begs, maybe the reason why it's 10% only, maybe the reason why agriculture is 10% only is because the banks are lending only 10% only, and therefore it begs the question, maybe the banks should allocate more for the agri sector for it to be bigger. What I have here basically is the per capita income and the agriculture share among equals. I got this from the IMF. The middle here is the Philippines, and our per capita income is $3,472 per year. That's per capita income. The 5 countries on the left are the immediately, so we are, for example, we are the 106th richest, if you can call it that, 106th in the world. And what I have here, the 5 on the left are basically those who are the 5 just on top of us. So for example, Georgia in Eastern Europe has an income of $3,977 per capita income. And then what I have here on the right here is the countries that are immediately behind us, the 5 countries immediately behind us. And so the question is the share of the agricultural sector abnormally low as to make for us a conscious effort to allocate more resources to it? And what you see here, among countries of equal income, and basically we are in the middle of the pack. And what I'm saying here is, I'm not sure if we should make a conscious effort, but it answers in relation to similar incomes in the world, we are not abnormally low in terms of our allocation of agriculture. Of course, before that, of course, these are countries around the world with similar income, but one can make an argument that Georgia and the Philippines are so different, or even Azerbaijan and Philippines are 2 different countries. So what I do next is I compare it among this Southeast Asian economies with basically the same similar climate. And what I have here is I ordered the per capita income in terms of the from richest to poorest. So Malaysia obviously has the biggest, $8,224 per capita income. In Vietnam, $2,163, and ours is $3,472. And what I have here in the orange is the agricultural share. And so the question is the share of the agricultural abnormally low as to make a conscious effort to allocate more resources to it? And at least comparing it with ASEAN, in ASEAN, the share of agriculture is not abnormally low. In fact, we are in the middle of the pack. I now talk about the mandatory credit allocation in MSME. The micro enterprise is up to, by definition, is an enterprise whose asset is up to 3 million pesos. And the small enterprises is an enterprise of over 3 million with an asset of over 3 million up to 15 million pesos. And the mandatory credit allocation for micro and small enterprises is 8%. And what we see here is since 2011, the banking industry has not fully complied. And so what I would say is the industry has effectively opted to pay the non-compliance fee as a cost of doing business. And this is the mandatory credit allocation in medium enterprises. By definition, medium enterprises are enterprises, firms that have over 50 million pesos in asset and up to 100 million pesos in asset. And this is now the credit allocation, and the requirement is to allocate 2% of loanable funds. And basically, the banking industry has always fully complied. Whether the bank are actually complying, I'm not sure. Is it a matter of complying or a matter of profitability? For example, these enterprises have economies of scale, or the fact that these firms, 15 to 100 million, have collateral. So I'm not sure if the mandatory credit allocation here is needed because there is collateral. the banks, I think, might actually lend these enterprises regardless of this 2% mandatory credit allocation, precisely because of profitability and the availability of collateral. So mandatory credit allocation in MSME. Let's talk about the MSME. So in terms of the list of establishment, micro enterprises constitute 89% or 850,000 among the list of establishments, and small enterprises constitute 10% of all the list of establishments, and that is 98,126. In terms of employment, the micro enterprises produce 29% and small enterprises produce 26% of new jobs. In terms of income, micro enterprises account for about 5% and small enterprises account for 21% of the GDP. So with that size, with that contribution of the MSME, mandatory credit allocation, one would argue would have a social value. But then again, the calculation has to be, how we determine it has to be reversed. Do not assign the percentage MSCA to get to GDP. The way it works is there's no government guarantee. The way it works is Congress assigns a number, 10%, 10%, or 5%, 5%. And then there's no government guarantee. There's no skin in the game. It's just the banks left to do the mission. So my proposal is, it's reverse calculation. The government must figure how much it is willing to guarantee to get to the percentage MCA. So use the political cost as proxy for the social value. If it is willing to raise taxes, that has a political cost, and therefore, the fact that the government is willing to raise taxes, that's an indication that the government sees a social value in having mandatory credit allocation. Take away from Department of Education, for example, if you do that, that's going to hurt. But the fact that you're taking away, it's a signal that there is a value in doing mandatory credit allocation. But if the government is not willing to raise tax, or it is not willing to take money from elsewhere, then as far as government is concerned, that's a signal that mandatory credit allocation has no social value. And if it has no social value for them, it is unfair for the government to put all the burden into the banks. Now I go to mandatory credit allocation in innovation. So expenditure on intellectual, so the GDP has the income and the expenditure side. I'll go to the expenditure side. On the expenditure side, the GDP has, the Philippine Statistics Authority, they name it intellectual property production, and that sector grows by expenditure in that sector grows by 20% per year, or it doubles every 4 years. So in that sense, there is no need for banks to allocate resources because there is actually a growing amount of expenditure in that sector. The problem with the law is it's a bit income approach, and the problem with income approach is income from innovation is ambiguous. So if you go it from the income, we as in theoretical sense, what we have is this is solo residual, and if the small y is per capita income, and we're able to measure per capita income, and alpha is it's the capital elasticity of output, and small k is the capital labor ratio. These numbers are measurable. Alpha is approximately 1/3. And the problem is the definition. Basically, if A is technology or innovation, the problem with the income approach is technology basically is everything that we cannot measure. This is measurable. Capital labor ratio is measurable. This minus that Measurable minus measurable is immeasurable, so that anything immeasurable is technology, and that's very problematic. It's like measuring sandman. Of course, the latest one is the endogenous growth model, where we have a certain equilibrium technology, where N, we know, is population growth, that's roughly 2%. If beta is the capital elasticity of output, and gamma is the labor elasticity of output, then those numbers are measurable. But theta, once again, is not measurable. So that, you know, the idea is good, but if you are to measure innovation in terms of income, it's in real life is practically immeasurable. It's everything that you cannot measure, everything that you cannot find, and income grows, it must be innovation. And if you are basing the credit allocation on that definition, it's very ambiguous. I think it's dangerous. For example, in the law, it states there, innovation refers to the creation of new ideas that results in the development of new or improved policies, products, processes, or services, which are then spread or transferred across the market. It really sounds good, but basically anything that improve policies, products, process. So
Hello, everyone. We're just encountering some technical difficulties. Let's just wait for Dean Louis to get back on Zoom and share his screen. Thank you. And just as an update to everyone, we now have Dean Louis back in our plenary. Thank you for your patience.
hello again, sorry for that. So let me
Welcome back, Dean Louis.
sorry for that. So is my screen back? Just to make sure.
Yes, sir, we can see it, but you can also put it on slideshows. Thank you, sir. We can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the definition by law, which is it's basically capturing sandband. So the notion of significant changes is residual changes from measurable factors. So anything that you can measure, if you increase the number of people that you hire, that's measurable. If you buy more capital machines, for example, equipment, that's measurable. And if output grows and anything that labor and the machine cannot explain, and that is innovation. So that means it's anything. The notion is that everything, when output increases, that has nothing to do with something that's immeasurable, it must be innovation. Just to discuss, the Schumpeterian creative destruction is the creative destruction occurs during competition when private agents out of profit motive innovate new creations to replace and therefore destroy outdated ones. So for example, the tape destroyed the record. The innovation of the floppy disk destroyed the tape. The innovation of the hard disk destroyed the floppy disk. The innovation of CD destroyed the hard disk. The innovation of USB destroyed CD, and the cloud is destroying the USB. So that's creative destruction. So that the nature of innovation being profitable renders mandatory credit allocation negatory. My point being is government does not need to force banks because banks will force their way into financing innovation. If it is that profitable, banks will lend. There's no need to force them to do things. Another update in theory is endogenous human capital and endogenous physical capital. And the measure, the growth of human capital is savings on human capital times per capita income. So that's measurable. And the growth in capital, physical capital, is savings in physical capital times the output. So that human capital grows from expenditure. For example, the way it works is you invest on the tuition, for example, to become a dentist, but you don't invest on the increased income of someone because that someone will become a dentist. At least the tuition fee is measurable, but the output, how much will the student become more productive, that is something immeasurable. And that's the problem with the current law. The innovation is based on something that is immeasurable. At least we know the tuition. So it's based on, it's easier if it's expenditure based. And physical capital grows from the expenditure. That means souping up the equipment or buying more equipment. Unfortunately, the way it's written is innovation is measured in terms of the additional output from that equipment. So how do you measure that? It's at least you can measure the price of the equipment, but you cannot measure the additional output from that equipment. Coincidentally, this is basically more Sharia compliant. That's compliant with Islamic finance also. I'll end up with takeaways. I think I'm just right on time. For mandatory credit allocation to work, it must be accompanied by government guarantee on principal and risk-free interest. Banks have not been able to comply in the mandatory credit allocation for agriculture sector because 25% may be prohibitively high. Banks have not been able to comply in micro and small enterprises, but have been able to comply in medium enterprises. And it could be because that smaller enterprises have smaller or no collateral and are disadvantaged in terms of economies of scale. Given MSME's contribution to employment and output, and I think Congress is reviewing it, it is timely to review. But when my urging is, if they have to do reverse calculation, not the other way forward. If they're not willing to put skin on the game, it is not fair for government to force banks to allocate resources to certain industry, to the industry. And again, we keep in mind that these resources are not the bank's resources. These are depositors' resources, our savings, basically. Mandatory credit allocation and innovation is tricky. Enterprises and banks should be investing and risking on research and development. New products, technologies, and so on are proven to be innovative only after profitability is realized. And indeed, if the profitability is realized, the government did not force banks because the banks will force their way into financing the production and usage of innovation. Some disclaimer, the government guarantee is necessary and sufficient for mandatory credit allocation to work, However, these interventions are not sufficient for socially preferential sectors to develop and grow. In an example, a colleague, Emil Francisco and Tristan Canare, they're two of the three authors. In the case of small and medium enterprises trying to penetrate the global value chain, access to credit is only tied at seventh among the major concerns. So the most important for enterprises is corruption, to solve corruption. Second, high tariff in export markets. The third most important is infrastructure. The fourth most important is meeting international standards. The fifth is foreign currency exchange. The sixth most important for them is internet connection. And only seventh is access to inputs and technology and access to credit. So that apart from MCA, mandatory credit allocation, and with government guarantee, other hindrances must also be addressed to realize development and growth. For example, these first six must also be addressed before MCA with GG to actually for us to realize true development and growth. So I end my presentation there, and I'll take questions. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Dean Louis, for the presentation about the topic. And at this point of our program, we will now open the floor for questions. So there are three ways to participate in our Q&A segment. The first is you can put on your video and audio, and then you can ask the questions. You can raise your hand so I can call you, and then Dean Louis can hopefully be able to answer your question. So the second way will be to type your question in the Zoom chat for our Zoom participants. And the third way is for those who are joining us in Facebook, you can also put your question in the comment box. So I'm looking at the Zoom chat and we have a comment. I'll just read it out. This comment is from Ms. Melisa Agabin. Her comment is the following. The number of MSMEs reported by the statistics authority is underreported. It includes only those that have SEC registration or some formal registration with the government. It does not include at least 2 million sari-sari stores and those in the public markets. The correct reckoning of the number of micro and even small enterprises is something to focus on for the NSA. So maybe I'd like to give the floor to Dean Louis if you have any comment to that particular feedback in the chat in terms of the numbers being understated.
Well, in my presentation in the paper, it should be reviewed. The mandatory credit allocation with government guarantee has to be reviewed in the case of MSMEs, and I think that's what Congress is doing right now. And with that stated, it's more. We said it has to be reviewed because MSMEs do contribute to the economy, and what the comment said basically is even more so because she says it's understated. And so basically we're mutually inclusive. We agree, I think, that even more reason for us to review the mandatory credit allocation in MS, particularly the MS, the micro and small enterprises.
Thank you, Dean Louis. Now I see that we have a question. So I'd like to request Dr. Bruce Tolentino to please put on your video and your audio. And yes, sir, the floor is yours for your question.
Hi, Dean Dumlao. Good afternoon. Just a couple of comments. Number one, PD 717, the original loan quota law, was passed in 19. Then RA 10,000, which was the modified Agri-Agra, was passed in 2011. Recently, RA 11901 lapsed into law right after the end of the Duterte administration. This is the amended Agri-Agra Loan Quota Law. So in our country, we have had at least 46 years of experience already with loan quotas, particularly for agriculture. And we haven't been able to do anything. That's number one. And related to that, you said that the quota should also be accompanied by guarantees. The fact is that in the 1970s, we organized the Kedan Fund Guarantee, the Kedan Guarantee Fund Board for all agriculture. It was operating alongside the National Food Authority. Then we also had the Guarantee Fund for small and medium enterprises. Then we had the Small Business Credit and Guarantee Fund that was operating within DTI and is now the Small Business Fund, Loan Fund. And more recently, we now have the Phil Guarantee. So these institutions, guarantee funds, have already been operating alongside the loan quota law. Now, I understand that many of the banks who do lend to agriculture also require that they be covered by a guarantee. But as you yourself point out, all this is not working. So the question I lead up to is, well, you just make a flat statement that there are socially desirable outcomes of these arrangements, but I do not see any evidence of that. And look at other countries that have also done this. There's also very little evidence to show that these things work. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's just again the what was alluded to earlier is the MS particularly the medium there, it's 15 million to 100 million. That's not a problem. The problem is the MS. So there is they do contribute to society, but the question is the credit guarantee you mentioned also the government guarantees are there and they're existing. The question is, do they match the actuarial cost of default? And again, if the government is to assign a certain mandatory credit allocation, it has to match what the government is willing, and that government, the amount of that has to match the actuarial cost of what they will assign. Given that you mentioned that those, I'm not sure if people are aware of these guarantees. That's one thing. But my other comment is, do the guarantees match the actuarial cost of default of these credit allocation? But yeah, thank you for that. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Tolentino, for the question, and also to Dean Luby for responding to that particular question. I go back to the Zoom chat, and we have another question. This question is from, again, Ms. Melissa Agabin. The question is, for Dean Luby, based on your close study of credit allocation, will you be brave enough to recommend to policymakers the scrapping of any mandatory credit allocation policy?
So, mandatory credit allocation can be for others country, for example, for those who have relatives in the States. Most of the people in the States, most college kids in the States benefit from the guaranteed student loan, and there's also that's mandatory credit with government guarantee. So there are benefits to those things. We don't have it in this country, but again, we are different countries, but apparently, micro and small enterprises do contribute to the economy. They need aid. Probably they're not. It's not necessarily insufficient for them to grow up to help them, for us to develop, but we certainly need help. There's a value in helping these small enterprises. So the question is, if there's a mandatory credit allocation, and that credit allocation it's fairly we can say it's unfair because the government has no skin on the game. Dr. Tolentino mentioned, of course, that there are guarantees that that many people are not aware of. But the question is, if there is a mandatory credit allocation, there has to be a matching from government, and that matching from government is government guarantee. And the government guarantee must at least equal the actuarial cost of default of what is to be forcibly allocated to selected sectors. Otherwise, if the government cannot guarantee, then there should be no mandatory credit allocation.
Okay, so thank you, Melissa, for that question, and thank you, Dean Louis, for again answering that particular question. Our next question in the Zoom is from Mr. Sean Kyle Xavier Kipe. And so his question is, it's a long one. So good afternoon, Dean Louis. I would like to ask if you see MCA as a possible intervention for poverty incidents through the credit support of MSMEs and the agricultural sector, which is a possible source of incomes for families as per FIES data. Given that micro and small enterprises are conceived to have no means for collateral.
Again, if there is a flat out mandatory credit allocation without government guarantee, and basically the banks have two choices. They can either lend out, and because there is information asymmetry, there's no guarantee that these agents will pay. Eventually, they will raise interests, and the money that is being lent out is not by the banks; it is owned by depositors. So that there's also a risk there. Are we willing to do that? That's the question. So so if that MCA raises interest, and that will drive out good and bad lenders alike. And if the banks comply, it's not the bank's money that's being exposed; it's the depositors' money. So we have to be aware of that. The mission is good. We love to help, but are we willing to sacrifice depositors' money? So the only way for interest not to increase is there has to be a government guarantee. That's the way it works. And again, this is not new, and that's the reason why I don't think this is publishable in an international journal, because it exists in 2000 guaranteed loans in more than 100 countries around the world in 2003, and much more in 2022. So so MCA is good. It can be beneficial, but there has to be mechanism also, a government guarantee, so that banks would be willing and able to lend to these institutions.
So thanks, Sean, for the question, and again, Dean Louis, for answering that question. Dr. Bruce Tolentino has raised his hand again, so I give the floor back to Dr. Bruce for your next comment.
Thank you. One point of information, the medium and small scale quota has lapsed.
Yeah.
As of 2019, there's no longer any quota because the quota has lapsed. So Congress is, of course, talking about more quotas. And if we allow Congress to talk longer, they will have a quota on everything. Now,
yes.
We talk to the banks. I work at the central bank, and we talk to the banks very often. And the key point that the banks make is that why force the banks to lend to projects which they see as not credit worthy?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem that they often point out is that they would like to lend if they can find credit-worthy borrowers and credit-worthy projects. But it turns out that it seems they have a hard time finding credit-worthy projects and credit-worthy borrowers. And this goes to your last point. Credit may be the last thing that projects need. They may need good seeds. They may need irrigation. They may need storage. They may need technology and good management. And when all of those other things are present, credit will come. It will not be a problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just like in my disclaimer, just like in the case of medium enterprises and entering global markets, the disclaimer, my disclaimer is that market access is just the seventh top concern. There are so many other concerns. For them, it's corruption, and then internet connection, and so on and so forth. So again, and as you alluded to, there are other concerns that those have to be addressed also. And I think they have to be addressed first before this to actually work. But if we are to have an MCA, there has to be a government guarantee, and the matching, there has to be an actuarial match between the two. Again, but I agree with you totally. There are other factors that need to be addressed before this works.
So thank you, Dr. Tolentino and Dean Louis, for your additional insights on the matter. We have a comment from Ms. Maria Michelle So. One of the struggles of banks in granting credit to micro and small enterprises, of which a portion of the agricultural sector falls, is the compliance to required proof of income. It is just hard to balance compliance to the credit allocation mandate and the regulatory requirements when it comes to credit documentation. So maybe Dean Louis, you would like to put your thoughts regarding that particular comment.
Okay, that's again, that's your perfect example of asymmetric information. There are good ones there. There are small and micro ones that are good ones, but there are small and micro ones that are not creditworthy, except that there is asymmetric information the banks cannot figure out. And so which ones are good and which ones are bad. And so the unfortunate thing is the banks have two choices. They can just pay the fine, the non-compliance fine, or they can raise the interest. And when they raise interest, they will drive out good and bad lenders alike. And the way we see right now, it is as if the banks have chosen to pay the non-compliance. Whether that's fair or not, it's probably not fair for the banks.
Thank you, sir. So our next question has it as, the penalties paid by banks accrue to the ACGF, or the Agriculture Credit Guarantee Fund. This is used to guarantee farmer loans. The funny thing is that depositors' money would be used to lend and also guarantee the loan. So the question is this practice elsewhere?
Well, what was stated is the general practice is government guarantee. So that practice is not the general practice, I would say. But I would like to make additional comment is I am not sure whether that amount is being dispersed transparently and being dispersed the way it was stated.
Thank you, sir, for the response. And maybe as our final question for our Q&A, we have this from Mr. Aaron John Duque. Given that there is a current pressure from hawkish Fed signals to force central banks to increase their interest rates, do you think it is still necessary to recommend MCA, especially if borrowers would likely opt to stay in the sidelines?
Is necessary? Do you think it is still necessary? So again, the borrowing, the lending, it has a supply and demand. So, and it becomes even more unfair for the banks, I would say. The fact that borrowers are not applying, and as much as they want to comply, then that's more reason that banks will not be able to comply. And they will have to pay the penalty. They'll pay the penalty because they're not lending per se, but because there is no one applying. And with that, the more reason for me to argue that it is even more unfair for banks to be fined.
Thank you, Dean. So I'd like to request the admin of the economics department to please share the screen again. So we would like to invite everyone to attend our next webinar. This is scheduled on September 28th, Wednesday, 10 a.m. Willingness to pay for an annual vaccine in an endemic COVID-19 scenario, a contingent valuation study, and our speaker for that session will be Dr. Rosalina Pitan, Professor of the Ateneo de Manila University. And we would like to invite everyone to visit our website for materials from previous seminars. Economic seminar series videos can also be seen in YouTube and also in our Facebook page. So we invite you to also join us in our various social media platforms. Of the Department of Economics of the Ateneo de Manila University, we thank everyone again for joining us this afternoon, and see you all in our next economics webinar on September 28th.